Hi, Adam. Hi, Bob. Thank you very much for joining me on the Coffee and Pens podcast. Let's start with a short introduction. Adam, can you start?
Yeah, and thanks for having us. We're excited for this. So very short introduction. I live in Houston with my wife, daughter, and dog. For my full-time gig, I work on a premarital counseling and couples therapy brand called Actually. And over the last year or two, Bob and I have been remotely working on a book called MBA Coffee Chats about how to plan and maximize your time in business school.
Interesting. And how about you, Bob?
Yeah, I live in San Jose with my wife, son, and dog. So we'll see some similarities between Adam and I. But my day job, I'm a consultant. Although right now I'm on paternity leave, spending a lot of time with our 7-month-old son, Jackson.
Right, that's amazing. Since your book is called MBA Coffee Chats and this podcast is called Coffee and Pens, I can see a common thread. What are your favorite brews, Bob?
I'm pretty non-picky. This might be hearsay given both of our titles, but I'll just take whatever's available to house blend.
All right. And how about you, Adam?
I feel like we're the exact same. You know, I enjoy a high quality coffee, but I'm sipping on Folgers right now.
Okay. Right. So how did you guys decide to work together on MBA Coffee Chats?
Well, we worked together for real. We met at our day job
For real
back in 2014. Yeah, as a suspense. No, just kidding. And then we both went off to graduate school separately. Adam was in Chicago, I was in the Bay Area, and stayed in touch and got to the point where we thought we might want to work together sometime on building a company and wanted a way to test that is the short version. And so we started looking at ways to have a project to work on together. And it started with relatively humble beginnings where we just started kind of posting on Reddit and putting some thoughts together around the space that we both had experienced. The MBA, and over time, and we can talk more about this, but it sort of merged from posting on Reddit to a newsletter to a book, and kind of culminated with us publishing it over the summer with Rob, who you've spoken with previously.
I think that the only thing I'd add is like we were doing a lot of brainstorming on. We knew we lived in different cities, and so what we were doing needed to be remote. It also needed to be something that could work well with spiky time commitments. We knew it wasn't going to be a priority, so it had to be something that we could be obsessed with for a weekend or something and then drop for a month. And then I think the third thing we talked a lot about was how can we find something that we have something unique to say, unique to us in particular, like Bob and Adam. We have a unique opinion on this, but we're also very visibly credible in. And that kind of like narrowed the options pretty significantly, right? Because we have a lot of unique opinions that we think are right, but we have no visible credibility on. And we have some things that we have visible credibility on, but we don't have anything unique to say. And this was one of the easy ones where it was like, we have the credibility in that we've just done it and we were lucky enough to go to great schools. And we also did the experience a little differently and had a unique point of view on it.
All right. So if I got it correctly, you started with just posting some stuff on Reddit without the idea of having a book. Then you saw some feedback, some engagement, you started a newsletter, and then from the newsletter you evolved into writing the book.
That's right.
All right. What's the time period between starting on Reddit and publishing or starting the book?
That's such a good question. A lot of it feels like it happens somewhat organically, you know? Shoot, I don't know.
What do you think? We started writing and brainstorming on, hey, I think we want to do this. Let's find a topic in fall, call it September 2019. And by January or February 2020, we sort of had gone through the things that Adam had flagged earlier, like where can we be visibly credible, where can we have an opinion, and settled on the topic of the MBA. But then it took another few months before we really focused on that. How can we make the most of the experience portion, right? Because there's a ton of stuff for applicants and how do we apply to school. There's a whole bunch of there's alumni, right? The life cycle of an MBA person is pretty broad, and we ended up writing a book very narrowly focused. And we sort of figured that out in January or February 2020 in terms of our audience. Started writing blog posts for a few months because, like Adam said, we'd be obsessed with it and push out a bunch of stuff, and then we just completely drop it. And by the summer of 2020, I think we started realizing, hey, let's put these all together now and make it a more coherent book. And I think we finished our first draft of that by the end of that year. And then coming into early 2021, so a little under a year ago, we started talking a bit more about, well, maybe we should push this out more formally and do some self-publishing, and then ultimately worked with Rob as our publisher to put it together and push it out more broadly. So I think that puts us at this point almost on like a 2-year timeline where we published a couple months ago.
Okay, perfect. Was that at a later stage that you decided to work with Rob?
Well, Rob was kind of a mentor from the start. Adam had been in touch with him, had really liked his book, The Mom Test.
Mhm.
Give that a little plug, right? And then Rob was starting to play with this idea of how can we write recommendable books, and it's morphed over time as well. But so we would touch base with him, and he was putting a lot of thought together on this process and how do you treat your book like a product and iterate and engage with your reader and have beta readers and develop it. And he was instrumental for a number of months with really helpful touch points of information and guidance. And then we started to formally work with him, I think, later in the process as his own thinking was maturing, and it sort of dovetailed together with our book. I don't know, Adam, does that feel fair? Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think it was just as part of we were in the community of authors he had built. And just to kind of hold ourselves accountable, we were posting a lot of updates. Yeah, I just remember what actually led to it is they reached out and were like, hey, it seems like, the book has a lot of potential for word of mouth. People are finding it and referring it, even though we've stopped doing anything whatsoever. And that's when we ended up kind of working together. And it's honestly been really great. I would highly recommend it for anyone. It's an awesome process and they're a great team.
Yeah, I've got a good experience talking to Rob and talking to other people that have been involved with his product. How did you guys divide the work between the two of you?
It's a great question. We were talking with someone else about this recently, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this, Bob, because this is all like in hindsight, so maybe my memory of it is different. But we had very, very blurry lines. If I had to think of a general workflow or division, I would say both of us worked on everything. Both of us did everything, but we kind of alternated roles a little bit. So our typical workflow would be one of us would come up with an idea for a chapter or early on a Reddit post. Then they would write up an outline or a really quick first draft, then flip it over to the second person who would come in and write some pretty strategic high level thoughts like, actually, it feels like, it should be more about this, or let's cut this whole section or rework it and then flip it back. And then from there, the amount of changes that were happening decreased drastically, right? So like the first person writes a draft, the second person changes 60% of it, the third person changes 20% until it's ready to go. And then generally one of us would post it, we would get feedback, another person would go in and incorporate that feedback, and then more micro edits would happen. I think that as we wrote more and more, that process shrunk drastically to the point at the end where I think we would often write a chapter in one go, and then the other person would come in and make like 5% copy edits just because we were so aligned on things, and had gotten so much better and faster at writing, because we can get into this later, but every chapter in the book went through a intense feedback process where it was either posted on Reddit and was torn to shreds, or sent to a bunch of our friends who were in school, or sent to our newsletter and torn to shreds that way. And so I think like we very much did not want to have clear roles around like, I'm the writer, you're the editor, or I'm the marketer, you're the publisher or something. And instead we just each did everything, but made sure to flip back and forth. I think just to rant a little bit, there was one specific time where we had very clear roles. And I think that was when we wrote the very first draft of the book. I think you, Bob, took much more of a you wrote the introduction and kind of put a lot of weight behind the first draft of the book. And I remember I felt a little like I was like not doing enough, but it never led to anything. And we ended up, I think it all like evened out. And
Yeah, there was a lot of ebb and flow, and we got better and better at it. I don't think either of us considers ourselves a natural writer. And so between improving at the ability to write and then finding a tone that worked for both of us, those writing cycles that Adam talked about got narrow and narrower, quicker and quicker. I think the other side of this, Adam, that is maybe the less glorious part, but a lot of what I heard you talking about was our writing process together. But then as we started turning this into a book, right, we had a MailChimp subscription list. We had built a little website. Like there was all this other surrounding aspects beyond just the writing. And
that's a good point.
I would say for us anyways, like Adam and I have very different strengths. My tendency is to be a grinder and to like push through things. I think Adam's very good at like seeing different ideas and picking his head up and like finding other places to go. And so I think we would have a healthy tension as to like challenging each other in different ways with that. And it would lead us to, pick up. And I think Adam does a great job of being like, oh, we should do X. Like, let's start working on the book, or let's build the newsletter. And then I do a better job of being like, oh, a newsletter. All right. Like, let's get into this and do it.
That's a really good point. And two things that come to mind there is like, there were clear roles around like, you tended to own the newsletter, I tended to own the website, things like that. And then I think you nailed that around like, to flip the negative of it, I often took us down weird paths that led to nothing. Like, oh, we should do a series of workshops, and we would get a bunch of demand for it and signups, and we'd be like, we don't want to do it though. So we would cancel it. And Bob's very good at being like, well, let's send another edition of the newsletter first, or like, let's actually do the thing before, like at one point we were exploring like building a really cool software tool for MBA students around like note-taking and building a portfolio. And I still think that was a great idea, but like we didn't have the time or the interest to do it, so there was like a healthy tension around that as well. And then I would say one more thing is I think I tended to play the role of more words, more ideas, and you played a good role of like editor and clearer words, clearer ideas,
Yeah, that went back and forth, but I do think, we found, again, a balance there with that in our writing and our editing.
Yeah, so you were very complimentary in your efforts and skills.
I think so, which was a ton of fun, right? Yeah, I'm excited to continue to do stuff with Adam, and we still like always ideas around from it.
Yeah, we'll write another book for sure, or a blog or something. It's just it was also fun because like we started with two very different writing styles and found like I really like the voice we found at the end.
How did you work towards that voice?
So I would say it was more organic than not, but I think a lot of it honestly was because we were Reddit first. It was we got very quick feedback, especially early on around like, oh, that voice did not work, So like for instance, we are very, 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 I guess we've gotten away from it a little bit, but our voice is very much not authoritative and not, you should do this. It's very much like, here's what we did, here's that approach, here's what you would consider, and back and forth. And that was something we were very explicit about and we talked about over and over again. And we would often like go in feedback wise and be like, this is too prescriptive. We need to dial it back. I don't think we ever wrote down, this is our voice, but we talked about very clearly, like, we're not authoritative, prescriptive, this is the way. And we also talked about always trying to make it light and funny as much as we can. Were there any other voice elements we consider? Those are the two that come to mind for me.
Yeah, I think the word casual and informal, but knowledgeable comes to mind too. And the metaphor that we always used in our heads was if we had a younger sibling that we wanted to give advice to, how would we do that? Right. So authentic, like opinionated, but also accommodating, right? Like you can choose your own paths. And at the end of the day, I think what was most important, I think to us was like no airs. We did not want to be pretentious in how we were sharing this information, but like just be helpful.
So you mentioned a lot of communicating back and forth to get to a voice and to work on the book together. Was that a lot of asynchronous or more synchronous communication?
I think that it depended on the topic. All the writing, 90% of the actual like writing and making was asynchronous, flips back and forth. But then when it came to like high level contextual strategic things, it was reversed. And it was probably 90% random phone calls and 10% asynchronous. Here's what I think. Like all the voice stuff, 90% of it, I think was aligning on it over the phone and things like that. And then 10% was in comments and, writing out. That's my take on it. What do you think?
Google Docs was amazing, right? We used comments, we used the editing, we were all over the writing each other, or writing with each other asynchronously. But yeah, I agree. Like my whole family, my wife, but even my family that lives 3,000 miles away back east, they see me on the phone and they're like, oh, are you talking to Adam? Right? Like constantly on the phone with random phone calls. And we'll miss each other sometimes. But it really helped because for about 6 months or so at the beginning of this, Adam was starting his own company. I hadn't gone back to work yet from after grad school. And so we had a lot of flexibility in our schedules, and we were probably on the phone daily, but never at a scheduled time.
Okay. Did you use any other tools apart from Google Docs? Google
Docs, MailChimp, or Google Docs for writing, MailChimp for the newsletter, Card with 2 R's for the website, Reddit.
Gumroad to sell initially.
Gumroad, yeah. Google for the email, which we had a big debate about whether we should pay for email or not.
I do think that was worth it though, because that gave us the whole Drive suite. So for like $7 a month, right? We now have a @MBAcoffeechats.com email address, which I think for something like this, where we're trying to be visibly credible, is better than adamandbob@gmail.com, right? But then associated with that email, we have all of our working docs on that drive in one central location. And I think that's really helpful. The other very niche tool that comes to mind that I would use a fair amount, I don't know if you ever got on board with it, Adam, but was the Hemingway tool. In the spirit of me being very short.
You love that tool so much.
It's just a really simple gut check, right? You copy and paste a paragraph into it, and it highlights where there's long sentences or big words, and kind of grades how complicated the writing is. And so I'd pull that up and go, "This is too much. We got to cut it down." And I found that as a really helpful, impartial third party.
I don't like it, but I know I should like it. Like I need it. I think I just have this bias around, you still want. I think sometimes the Hemingway tool removes voice. And that's why it's good for 80% of the sentences. And then you need like 20% to have more, to be purposefully wrong.
It's very impersonal. And that's where I think I too often became too impersonal with my writing, because I'd be stripping words out. And Adam did a really nice job of making sure the voice came through. And again, like another example, I think, of where we ended up being pretty complementary. And a large part of finding our voice was bringing those two tendencies together.
And how about planning? Like, did all the planning happen just between your phone calls and saying, like, this is what we're going to do next? Or did you use any tools for that as well?
I don't think we planned beyond 4 weeks. I think we set a series of short-term goals for us. We had a long-term vision that we adjusted, right? At one point, it was build a newsletter and build out an audience. There was a whole bunch of places to take that. Adam talked about the workshops. We talked about like camps. There was always the book as an option. And then there was a long-term goal of the book once we moved on from that. But beyond that vision, I think it was always, okay, let's complete this post in the next week, or let's get a finished version of the book in the next month. And we didn't plan much beyond that, just because with so much else going on in our lives, it felt a lot more manageable to think short-term.
There was one specific time I remember us writing goals in a Google Doc that were like 3 to 4 months out. If you remember that, it was very early when we were still considering like software tools and stuff like that. And it was more just a matter of when we wanted to stop working on it if things weren't going well, because we didn't want to feel obligated to keep working on it if we weren't enjoying it and learning. So it's like, okay, by this time we need to have a first draft of the book to people, and by this time we need to have decided whatever or something. But overall, it was more like very short-term goals, because we always had the thing of like, worst case, we'll just stop doing this. It's like, so it's always like one more post and then we'll give up or keep going.
So you mentioned it's likely you're going to write a second book together. And you probably won't stop in the process there, because you already did this. You already know what works, and it's probably going to work again. So would you consider scheduling more, or would you just have the same take?
My reaction is that I wouldn't want to write a book where we felt time pressure. One thing I actually admire about the way Rob wrote his book is that like it took forever, like he's been writing that thing for, I want to say, years. And he has like a good, I think, barometer of like quality check. You don't want to waste time on it. It'll never be perfect. But if this is a side thing we're doing and, we're friends, so we don't want to ruin that, then it'll always be more important that it's fun and enjoyable. So I wouldn't want to schedule it beyond short-term goals again. Like we have families, and I would never want it to be like, I'm going to, we committed to getting something done this month, so I'm not going to go on a walk with my daughter or something.
Yeah. And I really liked the way Rob broke down the process of writing this book, the whole like product life cycle that I mentioned earlier. And so I would think about planning probably in terms of that, to the extent that I'd say, listen, all right, this month I want to make sure I talk to 10, 15 people and have a good idea of, can we verbally communicate helpful ideas? Okay, check. And then it'd be, all right, can we write down some thoughts that'll be interesting and start to put it together? Okay, like maybe I'll spend a month or so on that. And then there'd be like, to Adam's point, where we used the Google Doc the one time to say what would need to be true for us to no longer work on this. There'd be a point at which I'd say like, all right, what's like my go, no go? So I think in that sense, there'd be some planning, right, of gating of how to proceed with this. But I don't think I'd get to the point. And I know, like, I've heard people have a lot of success blocking off 3 hours each morning to write in the morning because that's when they're best. I don't know that we'd get to that, because it felt like the best writing happened spontaneously a lot of the time for each of us.
Such a good point. Everything was like very sporadic in terms of like nothing for 2 weeks, and then we'd crank out like 4 chapters in a weekend or something. I think in general, I was just talking about this with another friend on like, some people like to manufacture moods and productivity, and some people like to harvest. Where it's like, I'm going to write 3 hours every morning, and I set my candle, which like triggers my mind to be in writing mode or something like that, versus the people that are like, I was out on a walk and I felt inspiration, so I sat down and like wrote 2 chapters. And I've never been able to like force the writing, and I don't think Bob has either. So we've always been more of the harvest of mood and an energy than manufacture it.
Are you guys familiar with David Cadavy? I talked to him a few weeks ago. He wrote a book about what you mentioned just now. It's called Mind Management, Not Time Management. And
so cool.
So he talks a lot about how he plans his entire week to harvest the right moods at the right times. So in the start of the week, he feels he's more creative, so he's going to do a lot more writing, for example, on Monday morning. And then on Friday afternoons, he's not going to do much writing, because then like the creativity is gone and like it's more of a drag, and he's probably going to do some more admin stuff. So it's an interesting read about what you just mentioned.
I'll check it out. That sounds like exactly what we're talking about. That's awesome.
Agreed.
Any other things that you would change for the next book?
That's such a good question. We haven't talked about this, I don't think. We've talked about what we would want to do the same, because there were some things that we were surprised worked so well, and we'd want to do those. But in terms of different, I think maybe a slightly bigger or growing audience. We chose such a narrow audience, and I'm glad we did. And it's the only reason why it worked. you know, because it's the perfect book for a very, very small audience at a very, very specific time. So when people find it, they're immediately like, oh, I want that, or oh, I want to recommend it. But it'd be nice if that audience was also like exponentially growing. You know, it is a very small audience that isn't likely to grow, you know, much. So it'd be nice if we picked a bigger audience or something like that. I think similar to that, an audience that we're a little bit more passionate about. Like we've moved on from that time in our lives, and it'd be cool if the topic more intersected a few. Neither of us has any desire to be a business school professor or a business school consultant or anything like that. It'd be cool if it was a topic that we wanted to do more in ourselves. I think maybe a third one is lean into the newsletter and website a little bit more. I think it worked really well, and we just didn't really care that much about it. Like we could have grown that audience to be really big, I think, if we really put some time into it. But yeah, those are the three that come to mind to me. What about you, Bob?
Audience is the word that comes to mind. I think that's right. I wish we had more time to build an audience around the book, right? Like even earlier we were talking about where else do we post this, and we're just relatively audience light beyond what we organically created in a short time. So I think that would be interesting and exciting and also help drive the book. But then, and there'd be planning involved in that, right? Like that extends the writing time because you have to do a lot of audience building before you even get to the actual book release. And then what you were talking about, Adam, with a growing audience, more passion. I think I'd love to write a book about a skill as opposed to a trait, right? Like this is, you know, people who are going to get an MBA graduate degree, not something, I had a great time with it. I'm proud of having gone to school and learned a lot in the experience, but it's not necessarily something that I'm like really excited to talk to people about. It's not the first thing I bring up when I am having coffee with random people, right? And I'd love to have a skill that I'm passionate about and get really good at, and then write something about that. I think that'd be really exciting.
So you both mentioned the limited audience, which is, I believe, people that already got into an MBA and then like want to find out how to get most out of this. Now I read your book as well, and I had the idea of doing an MBA a few years ago. And having read this book, I started looking up some information again. Have you considered targeting your book as well at people that are like on the fence?
We talked a lot about that. The short answer is like the entire media landscape and book landscape right now is targeted at the applicant and the decider, to make up a term, like people that are on the fence and people that are applying and want to get in. And there's a lot of good material out there. There's a lot of bad material out there, but it was just kind of like, we felt like it was saturated already and didn't want to play in that space. I think that if the book does really well, continues to grow, and we have more credibility there, that it would stand out in that landscape, that I think it would be, we do have strong opinions on that, on like who should get an MBA and who shouldn't, and how to apply in the right way. But it would have to, I think, be pulled from success and demand of the current thing than anything we'd want to do, just because there's so much there already.
Yeah, personally, I kind of always assumed I'd go get my MBA, right? And so I don't have personal experience to relate to the decider. And I think it's a really personal decision. And so it's hard to write a book that is shared with the masses as opposed to having conversations with people, right? Like we didn't write the book to replace the MBA coffee chat, but to augment it. And for personal decisions, I think sitting down and having coffee or just, chatting with someone is still incredibly important and irreplaceable.
So the next few minutes, I want to compare the MBA a little bit to writing. What do you think was more challenging of the two?
Oh, the MBA for sure. Like writing the book was a fun weekend hobby we did, you know? It was really fun. Not much of it was challenging, I would say. There was like interesting things, but nothing was hard about it. Yeah, I don't know. I would say nothing we did with the book was difficult. It was really fun to like learn to write better and to like translate, because we have conversations, people ping you all the time. They're like, hey, I'm applying to X or Y. Can we jump on the phone? And they ask you questions. We were just taking the answers and writing them into a book.
The MBA is so multifaceted. It's hard to just compare them against each other in the sense that the MBA was a full-time focus for both of us. That made it easy, right? Whereas the book was always a second thing, and that made it harder. But a lot of the soft skills and leadership development from the MBA was really hard and pushed me to learn and develop and grow. And so they had different elements, each of which were hard. But I think at the end of the day, they both felt a little bit like sandboxes to me, in the sense that when something went wrong, like who cared? It wasn't that big of a deal. They were both very safe environments. Adam and I had a good trusting relationship. If something didn't do well on Reddit, occasionally you'd get a mean comment or two, but it didn't really matter, right? You bounced back and you wrote something else or different. And similar in the MBA, where it was, I thought, a really special 2 years of just trying things and learning and exploring, and day to day there was very little to worry about. And so I think in that sense, both of these were a ton of fun. because they felt really low risk and just like a good way to spend some time.
What did you think that you learned from the MBA that you were able to apply to writing the book?
It's so interesting because there's the meta answer of like, you can't write the whole book was a product of the experience. It was like, here's what we learned about the experience and we do it differently. But I think in terms of like skills or learnings from the MBA that also helped with the process of writing a book, there's like the business stuff around like the marketing and positioning of the book, I guess.
I think I got three things.
Okay,
One,
three of them. I don't even have
coming
one.
at you like a good consultant. One relates to the marketing side of things, but just confidence. I think having played around in school and having a lot of classmates doing really cool things, like writing a book felt a lot less imposing. And I knew we had the skills to put it together and then market it and push it out. And so that was, I think, huge. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten started. Two, I took an awesome class called Winning Writing with a professor named Glenn Craman, who I just loved. He was amazing. He jokes that he teaches remedial writing to future business leaders. And it's somewhat true. It made me a much better writer. So it translated over. And beyond just that class, I think there's a lot of written assignments in the MBA where you need to communicate clearly, and that translated really well. And then I think lastly, certainly at the school I went to, I think at all schools right now, there's a focus on interpersonal working styles and teaming well. And I think the ability to give feedback effectively and in a helpful manner, and then also hear it well, was huge for Adam and I. I mean, we already had a good relationship, so I think we would have figured it out either way. But I think the MBA gave us a language and a framework for working together that made this somewhat incoherent, organic, let's just pick up the phone and chat, flowing style work, because we were able to play off of each other and learn from each other without ruffling any feathers. We
did do like very, very direct and uncovered feedback. You know, like we're very willing to be like, this is a terrible chapter that makes no sense. Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
Right. Bob, you mentioned that you took a writing class. What were the main takeaways from that class that you were able to apply in your writing?
Know your audience. The first of those classes, the professor, Glenn, literally goes around and says, hey, Adam, I hear you got this great company going on. And he has done like background information on everyone, just to make the point that, well, A, it helps everyone get to know each other. It's fun. It's funny. But that before you ever communicate to your audience, you have to know them. And I think Adam and I did that by having gone through the process. Second was that simple was just always better. Cut words, say it like quicker. There's actually a TikTok recently on Glenn's class with top takeaways. And I think that was one of the ones that they put together. And then related to that, but oddly specific, it was that, I'm going to get this right, adverbs are stupid. Was his general point. Just remove so them and use a better verb. What's the big argument?
Yeah. I think another thing you did a really good job of, or at the very least we're like very passionate about, is not telling people how they're going to feel. You know, like we would start our writing with like, hey, join our newsletter and MBA Coffee Chats. It's smart and interesting writing on blah, blah, blah. And you'd be like, how do we know it's smart and interesting? Like that's for them to decide. So it's writing on MBA, you know, like what is an actual, like you're very particular about what those are. And I thought that was really helpful, not saying things that are up to them to decide.
Are there any other writing tips that you'd like to add personally?
Oh, I have one big writing tip, maybe two, but my favorite writing tip is to like, always am just dumping thoughts into categorized Google Docs and in very, very non-edited, non-structured form. So it's like, oh, here's a thought on how to write your MBA essay. And I just like email it to myself or type it in the Google Doc. And then, you know, over a few months, you keep adding to that Google Doc. And then I go to write the chapter. And it's like, I have 50 bullets now. So now I'm not even writing the chapter. I'm just like cleaning up the sentences and organizing them. And then usually what happens is like of those 50 bullets, 8 end up becoming the whole article. And then the other, 42 are really great, like more resources page or another section. So for me, it became like really, really near the end, it was really, really easy to write new chapters because I had all these random Google Docs of related thoughts, like vertically related thoughts. And I could just go in and fill in the gaps. And that was really fun. It was just, I really enjoyed that. And I think that it's a huge, like, so we talked to so many people who want to write and they're like, I just can't get started or I don't know what to say. And it's like, you don't have to start. You don't even have to know what you want to write about. You just have to have 300 random one sentence thoughts or ideas. And then at some point start categorizing them and you'll have an insane amount of essays from that. And then I think the other tip is from Bob, which is just going through each sentence at one point and saying, what happens if I remove this word? Or what happens if I put a period here? And it's amazing how you have like what you think is a sentence where you can't remove anything. And then you like slowly remove every single word and add periods until, what you end up with is a 4-word sentence that started as like a 20-word sentence, and it's way clearer. And that's always so satisfying when you take a paragraph and you can turn it into just one punchy sentence. That's a really good feeling.
I have so many random Google Docs from Adam.
Yeah. The hit rate is not great. Like the conversion rate from it started as a Google Doc to made it into the book was very low.
Yeah, but I do think you touched on something that comes to mind, like just like let it go, like release your inhibitions of writing. I think I struggled with that at the beginning because I'd write a first paragraph, but then I start rereading it and I don't like this is the right way. I get in my own head, and we were just so much better when we'd rip through a page, and a lot of it would suck, but that'd be okay because it'd be a first draft of something down on paper. And I know not everyone writes with a partner, but I found that hugely helpful because it enabled that release of inhibitions. Like it was okay for me to just write because I knew Adam was going to come and take a look at it. And so I think even if you're writing on your own, I think finding a way to do that and then maybe step away and serve as your own editing partner, I think is really helpful, because without a second voice or the ability to step away from something, I think it's really easy to lose the message and to overcook the chicken just by sitting there and rereading and rereading and rewriting and rewriting.
All right, thank you. That's very insightful. Some things I've not heard before, some things that are very useful. Let's work a little bit towards the end, and I'm going to steal a question from your book. What didn't I ask that I should have?
You did read the book. That's a good question. It's very self-flattering of me to say that.
There's a whole world of last activities you need to do to actually publish a book. We spent way too much time on the subtitle and the title, right? Just figuring out what are we going to put on the front cover of this. But then also, what do we want the image to be and the graphics? And then once we did publish it on Amazon, there was a ton of conversation on what groups or categories do we want to be in? How we didn't have to do this because the team did, but then how do you optimize all of the ads and push the book out? And then how are you posting on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever your audiences are to then grow the book and give it a seed audience? And to me, those were beyond just writing the book, the hardest parts of this. That take a ton of time and effort, and if underestimated, it could be a great book, but it still, I don't think, will be successful without spending a lot of time on everything that comes after writing.
That's a good point.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate that.
Sorry, it was a great point. It was a great point. Yeah, I think maybe one thing is like in terms of mistakes we made, and one mistake we made, which I think is very cliche, is we spent our proportion of creating versus promoting was probably wrong, which everyone talks about this, like write one good essay and then promote it 10 different ways or 10 different times. And we very much did the write 10 essays and promote each once by one post. And we still have a bunch of content, like we've never posted anywhere or stuff like that. And in hindsight, we should have spent a lot more time promoting and repackaging. And we spent we just really enjoyed writing, and there was so much to say. We just kept writing more and more, when we could have just literally taken the very first essay we made and repackaged it a dozen times, and it probably would have done better from an audience perspective.
Yeah, those are some good tips. Let's finish with my final question. What's your secret?
This is going to be so corny, but being on a team as opposed to doing something on my own. Writing this with Adam, it would not have happened on my own. My wife and I have a side hustle where we do a local service company, and I'll similarly get questions like, how do you do that in work? And it's why I couldn't, there's not enough time. But with someone else involved, then, we can each spend half the time needed to do that. And there's so much trust that needs to go into the relationship to, not have to do the whole job yourself. But by working with people where I think I've had that level of trust, with Adam, with my wife, I've got another buddy, Dan, I've done some projects with, being on teams, we've accomplished like just so much more outside of work than I think would be possible if I was doing these things on my own or with any more need to control the whole thing myself.
Oh, I love that. That's such a good answer. And very much so. If I had to add one below that, because I think that's the most important one, it would be the broader, again, kind of cliched advice, and I'm going to butcher the phrase, but it's the be something to someone instead of everything to no one. And I think it's actually helped by being in a team, but it's so easy to be paralyzed or just ineffective by trying to build this big everything. And the secret or the superpower is being willing to say no to 99 things, to make something that's an incredible yes to just one specific thing. And as much as I had some complaints about our audience and like the person we ended up writing for, if we had tried to write like the NBA book or anything like that, nothing would have happened. And we would have ended up with nothing. So I think a huge secret is being willing to say no to most things and an amazing yes to one small, very narrow thing. And it's the hardest thing to do, at least for me personally. But the working with the team, is the biggest one. Like, it's so much easier to actually create when you have someone else.
Thank you. This was amazing, Adam and Bob. It was a lot of fun. Any final words?
No.
But if your audience is sitting there wondering if they should write, do it.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
That's a good way to end. So before we close up, where can people find out more about your book or about yourselves?
I would say, so our website is nbacoffeechats.com.
The best place to go to find us. And it's really targeted at the admit who's getting ready to go to school. So if that's the person listening to this, they should definitely check it out and maybe give the book a read.